Hi everyone, I'm Sanjana from Belong, and this is the Belong Online Literature Festival, or BOLF as we call it, and it is an initiative of Belong. Belong is a social venture that seeks to bring discrimination-free services and experiences to people who face identity-based discrimination. We run programs for inclusive housing, mental health, research, as well as book club and library for inclusive literature. You can learn more about these on www.belong.net. Before we begin, we want to also acknowledge the tireless efforts of our festival partners, the Wire being our media partner, our culture partner, that is the British Council, our accessibility partner, Access for All, without whom this event would not be possible. Now on to today's session. This session is titled Color Me In, Celebrating Brownness in South Asian Children's Literature with panelists Saumiya, Balasubramaniam, Sailaja, Joshi, and the one which is moderated by Nirat, Bhatnagar. Nirat is the founder of Belong and also a partner at Dalwork Advisors. He's deeply passionate about issues of diversity and inclusion. He has spent several years in strategy consulting in the social impact space, innovation and entrepreneurship, and management consulting. Before I hand it over to Nirat, I just want to make a couple of housekeeping announcements. During the first 45 to 50 minutes of the session, the moderator will ask the panelists their questions. Why this is happening, you should feel free to send in your own questions using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screens. The moderator will take some of these questions during the last 30 to 35 minutes of the session. Please keep your session short and to the point wherever possible. If your questions exceed 5 lines, we will not be able to take it because we want to optimize the number of questions we take it as well as time. Please also make sure to send in your questions while the moderator is speaking to the panelists, that is during the first 50 minutes of the session. We will not be accepting any questions after this point in time. And lastly, we're recording all our sessions and we'll be uploading them to our YouTube channel in the days to come. So in case you have friends who were unable to make it for this, or you yourself would like to rewatch it, you know where to find it. We're also sending all these instructions on the chat just so that you could refer to it during the discussion. That's all from me. Over to you, Nirat.
Thank you, Sanjana, and welcome everyone to the last session for the day, day number 3 on the Belong Literature Festival. Very excited to be anchoring this session along with Saumiya and Sailaja. I'll kick things off with a little bit of an introduction to both of their work, and then just describing how we'll sort of organize questions, and then we'll jump right into it. So without any delay, first let me sort of introduce the topic that we'll be talking about. The session is titled Color Me In, Celebrating Brownness in South Asian Children's Literature. So brownness is often a catch-all term for South Asian identities overseas, and brown children rarely see themselves in popular narratives, leading to feelings of marginalization, exclusion. How can we reimagine this? How can we sort of how can we extend children's literature to bring brownness to the center of the narrative? And what is the role going forward of children's literature and the representation of brownness in that literature to help children take pride in the skin color and to in their own identities? For this panel, we have two people, authors and publishers who frankly, I'd be hard-pressed to find a better panel. So I'll start with Saumiya. Saumiya Balasubramaniam is a children's book author who lives in Toronto in Canada. Her debut picture book, When I Found Grandma, was nominated for the 2020 Ezra Jack Keats Award. It was featured in the Globe and Mail in their list of 7 books to help kids make sense of the world, and by the CBC, 29 Canadian kid books and young adult literature to look forward to in 2019. Her most recent picture book is 2 Drops of Brown in a Cloud of White that delicately explores the themes of immigration. Welcome, Saumiya, and thank you for being on the panel with us. Sailaja Joshi is the CEO and founder of Mango and Marigold Press, an award-winning independent publishing house that shares stories of the South Asian experience. Founded in 2014, the company has produced 14 books across 4 different product categories and has featured on the Today Show, Us Weekly, People Magazine, New York Times, and the Washington Post. Her ambitions to have Mango and Marigold Press be an active participant in the field of multicultural children's literature, moving forward with the belief that we need diverse kids lit for all kids in the diverse world. Welcome, Sailaja. Great to have you on the panel. All right, so let me sort of just begin by asking you to describe your engagement with this theme of brownness in children's literature, and the way you engage with the literature ecosystem, right? The publishing ecosystem, writing and publishing, and what brought you to this? Why did you start focusing on this, and why does it matter to you? So maybe I start with Saumiya, if that's fine, and then Shailja,
Sure.
you could go after that. Okay.
Sure. First
Yeah.
of all, can you hear me clearly?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. Okay. So I have always written on I have always written on social themes and things and matter. What mattered to me the most, I've written essays in newspapers and articles, but writing for children, wanting to publish a book for children started after the birth of my first daughter, who was born, she's 10 years old. I have two children. She was born in the USA and she was raised in the US for a while. And when I found Grandma is my first published book. It came out last year, but it was my second written book. My first written book was actually Two Drops of Brown in a Cloud of White, and that I wrote an essay. Of simply when I walked back home from school with my daughter, my 4-year-old daughter. I was in Canada at that time. I just wrote what I felt, what I saw, and what I observed. And at some point of time, I thought a child who is walking down that road with me should possibly read this. And I was reading a lot of picture books at that time. So picture books is usually geared for children between the age of 4 and 7. It's text and illustrations. It appeals to young readers very much. And I thought I'll condense that essay and make it into a book. Two Drops of Brown in a Cloud of White is a simple, very gently layered narration between a mother and daughter walking down the street on a cold winter day. It's a story of how a new immigrant thinks and feels and observes, and how a child looks and perceives the same world that the mother is seeing and feeling. And it's a very interesting it's an interesting story set, mostly in dialogue back and forth between the mother and daughter, and how at the end of the story, the parent, this particular book or take of mine is slightly different in terms of role rehearsal. So there's a saying, right? The child is the father of the man. How the parent, the mother, learns a lot, and her perspectives and her outlook generally towards life in general is changed by how this child views the world. So that is my story, and it was important for me to see this narrative, to see this immigrant parent and a brown child, not so much a brown child and an immigrant, but the perspective of someone different, someone whose world is suddenly new. It was important for me to see this in a picture book. It was important for me to see a brown child and many children like this who might possibly to whom the story might resonate well, to whom every line, every dialogue, every picture, every character, every object in the book will resonate 100%. So that was my start into getting this published. It started with pitching this idea to a publisher, and at that point of time, I wasn't really thinking it's a brown child and it's a brown story and I have to really get this. And I wasn't quite thinking of it that way. And I went to a conference, a writers' conference 3 years back, held in Toronto by the Writers' Union, and a certain publisher said, I really love the storytelling voice. It's original, it's narrative. So it's really the story and how it was written that got the publisher's attention. But it's now, and it's right. It's right that it's sorted, it's classified into this brown multicultural literature because it's really what it is. It is a brown character, it's a brown author, and it will appeal to everybody, but it will resonate very, very strongly with children and parents of immigrants. So that was my start. And my other book, so I'm speaking about my book that I wrote first but got published second, but my other book is When I Found Grandma. It's a story about, again, a girl born and raised in North America and her grandma who's visiting from overseas, and how the culture between these two individuals is different. The intergenerational gap, the age gap, there's a lot of conflict. So this little girl Maya who's growing up in the US is very excited about grandma, but when grandma actually comes, life is not quite what she thinks it out to be. Grandma speaks in a loud voice. She cooks food that Maya is not liking. She calls Maya by a different name. There is a lot of conflict up until a point where there is a turn in the story when the little girl sees that grandma's heart and intent is almost exactly the same as hers. It doesn't really matter what she wears or how she speaks. At the crux, at the core, both of them, it's all about interpersonal relationships, about human relationships, and that does not change. That does not change no matter what you wear, how you speak words. So, and at the end of the story, they both, it comes out very beautifully how they kind of form a middle path between the two, just to coexist in a house. And again, that for me, the story is completely fictional, but it draws from a personal lens, from a personal observation of raising my daughter and my mother's visitors. So it was important to bring that out in a story. And again, I would re-emphasize it's one thing to bring this out, but it's also how it is presented. The story has to have a universal appeal. So that will extend readership to all folks, not just brown children and brown families. So that's the start of my venture into writing for children, writing particularly for children, brown children.
Thank you for sharing that, Saumiya. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sheila, you have had a very fascinating sort of entry point into publishing, right? You set up the press, the Mango and the Marigold Press. I also read that you set up library showers, etc. So can you just walk us through what your journey has been and why you do what you do?
Yeah, so Mango and Marigold started for us under the name actually Bharat Babies, and we started almost 7 years ago. We started at when I was pregnant with my daughter, and here in the US I was having a library themed baby shower. I am as I like to say, a recovering academic, a continuing bibliophile. I grew up with books. I have a long history with books. And I wanted on my bookshelf, as I was registering for gifts, I wanted books that reflected my culture, history, and heritage. And frankly, what I saw out there was a little problematic. You know, the books were either developmentally inappropriate, they were culturally inaccurate, or they were culturally insensitive. And I couldn't believe, I remember just staring at my Amazon screen as I was like trying to fill this registry of being like, are you kidding me? A country that has over 1 billion individuals and such rich stories doesn't somehow have representation in children's literature. And this is right before the heels of the We Need Diverse Books movement. And so I spent a year in a PhD program. I had my daughter was like 2-3 weeks old. I remember driving into class and my colleague and I are discussing and talking. And I'm talking to her about how I'm just yearning for my daughter to have like a Ramayana board book. Like all I want is just for my daughter to see herself. And she turns to me, she's like, why don't you do something about it? And I was like, okay, game on. So I left my PhD program, took $1,000 of startup capital and started a publishing house. And our mission and vision at that time was simply to continue to share the stories of my culture, history, and heritage. You know, I was born and raised here in the United States. My family is from Telangana now. And I just wanted those stories to be something that was easily accessible to my daughter. I quickly realized, though, that my vision was much bigger. That what I actually wanted was my daughter and her friends and her families to see brownness unabashedly celebrated on their bookshelves. And so within a year, within 2 years, the books that we created quickly shifted. At the start, they were stories, sort of retellings of Hindu folklore canon, however you might call it. And quite quickly, those stories shifted to stories of brownness as it's experienced here in the diaspora. And now that we're Mango and Marigold Press, we not only share the stories of we should say we share the stories of the South Asian experience. And that is really purposely vague, because I think South Asia frequently gets coined as just India. And South Asia is much more than that. I think there are many people, many communities of brownness for whom their origins in India are complicated by colonialism, by being part of slave trades and having to be forcibly removed from the Indian subcontinent and coming to Africa, to the Caribbean islands here in Americas. And I wanted all of those stories to be celebrated and shared. And so we shifted not only our name, but also the communities that we look to represent and the stories we share. I now say that, like, we love to tell the stories of the magnificent to the mundane, the everyday to the extraordinary. There are children who are celebrating Eid and Ramadan in our stories, and there are children who are just kind of bummed out because they're getting made fun of for their name, or because their superhero cape isn't with them. You know, it's stories that resonate in our brown community, and there's stories that are resonate outside of the brown community. And that's really, really important, because I think before we can demand for us to have a seat at the table, in the boardroom, a seat in politics, our children need a seat on the bookshelf. And that is what I try to do when we acquire books, when we acquire stories, because I deeply, deeply believe in that vision.
Sure. Thanks for sharing that. I have the next question is really about defining brownness, right? And the way it's represented right now in children's literature. It's still very, very early days, I suppose, for that. And how would you sort of how would you try and define brownness, contrasted, let's say, with representations of blackness or of let's say Hispanicness in children's literature? And where are we on that journey right now?
Yeah, I think that it's a really complicated question. Yeah. And so some of it starts.
Sorry, Sailaja, you are paused. Saumiya, is Sailaja paused for you?
It is glitching for me. It's been glitching for a few minutes now.
Can you hear me now?
Now it's better. We can hear Sailaja.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Can you hear? Okay, sorry. Internet bandwidth, as we're all battling for the internet right now, I think, downstairs.
Yeah.
But what I was saying is, I think some of it comes out. We have been prioritizing now over the past few years using own voice authors. And I think that really helps to drive the illustrations in our story and the language we use, using language like appa, amma, you know, things that are very central to our brownness and identity, and then bringing those out in illustrations. So for instance, in the book Always Anjali, there is a scene in the table where Anjali she's angry because she's just sort of realized the weirdness of her name and she wants to change it. She's just been made fun of. And on the table, there's a little vati that we all have on our tables here in the US that like has chutney, has ghee, has stuff. And it's that moment of brownness that comes in. It's that celebration that happens there that won't happen in a Black American household necessarily. That won't happen in a Latina household necessarily, because that's what happens in our Indian household. Things like having earrings on a young child, which again is just it just happened. Like, that's just how we are and what we do as Indian, as maybe even Hindus. And again, that getting depicted. So I think we are really early in the journey. And we as a publishing house, because we are, you know, 2/3 of our founding team are Hindu and 1/3 is Jewish. And so if and when we don't represent the stories that we're starting to tell, that's when we bring in sensitivity readers to collaborate on it, to call us out, to be very specific, to be like, that doesn't make sense. I don't understand that. That's not how I see it in my home. And we change. We listen and we change.
I would agree. Like, in the same way, I was going to start saying that for me, if you were to ask me what is brownness, for me, honestly, it's first the color of my skin. It's the color of my skin is brown. And from first, and then next, it's what food I eat, what form or structure I worship, what sport, what games I play, what games I like to play, what books I read, and what I see inside that book. For me, brownness, to bring into children's literature, is to align life, like life with its physical senses, with your sight and sound, is to align the real life with literature, because literature is life. There is a child that eats roti, that's brown in skin color, that eats that brings to school roti and curry, that likes to play cricket with his or her father. In the house next door, down the street, inside the classroom, in the school playground. So there is just that child inside a book, sitting on a shelf inside a classroom, that he and his other children read and see and are taught. That is brownness to me. It would be the same or similar in a similar way for an Hispanic, Black, or any other child. But I can speak for brownness because that's the lens I see through. So yeah, that's.
Sure. So that's actually the
It's
great.
really about what you see in. It's really about what you see in real life, to see in what you're taught and what your teacher speaks and what you read. It's almost as simple as that, except it's not.
So my next question, actually, and maybe Saumiya, I would start with this. So when one decides to start painting on a whole sort of blank canvas, right? And right now, I think, like Sailaja said, we are still at a very early stage in this journey towards truly representative brown literature for children, even for adults, I would imagine. As you start to, what is your writing process, Saumiya? I read something very interesting in an interview, I think, that you gave, about how you're not sort of trying to bring attention only to the teaching or the preachy moments, right? And how it's about the small acts. Can you sort of walk us through what your thought process is as you navigate choices of what to bring into the book and what to not what to exclude and what to include in the book?
For me, honestly, I cannot reinforce this much. It's the story. I'm walking down the street, what I'm feeling, I come home, I write down. For me, my writing process is, so far, sometimes it could be, but so far it's not, let me do this is what needs to be done. This is what I'm feeling. It's a very heartfelt expression of my emotions and my thoughts. When I write essays and articles, sometimes that's different. That's a voice that's different. But for children, when I write, it's a heartfelt expression of my emotions. And then when I form a book from it, I try a little here and there to. So let me step back a little. I have observed growing up. I grew up in India, in Bombay, but I mostly read for. And even today, I mostly read for knowledge. Books were seen. It's changing now, not as much as it is yet. Books were seen as source of knowledge, as a medium for learning. I am going to learn something. Stories will have morals. There is a lesson learned. Okay, what is the moral of the stories? Growing up, then books are seen as a source of knowledge. It's a little different here. It's also seen as a source of entertainment. It's like media or television or theater in India. It's also a source of entertainment. Now, children are not appealed or taken to so much for a story. This happened, and there is a moral of the story. They want to have fun. They want to see themselves. They want to laugh a little. So I try to inject a little bit of humor, and so my writing process is I put down what I think, and then when I write, I edit. My stories go to a lot of edit. From both my books, from the start of writing a full-fledged story to submission, took me 2.5+ years, although they are small, 800 words, 32-page story. It takes me a lot of edits and re-edits. I storyboard my book. So I write it down in pen and paper. I make a storybook. I write it down on paper. I see how the page turn works. I read it aloud a couple of times, and then I read sometimes to my children and see the response. And at a time when I'm happy with what I've read aloud and the children are happy, that's when I send it out to publication. When I found Grandma, I made it explicit. The original draft of the story did not have sari mentioned. There wasn't emphasis on sari so much, but when I submitted, I made sure that there was a sari, so children know that mothers and grandmothers wear sari and will wear sari in no matter where they are. I threw in some food. I deliberately injected some objects, some words, so there is a recognition for children to see those culture appropriate words in our book. And at a point where I feel that this will appeal and this needs to be heard, that's when I send my stories out to publication. And luckily for me, the Groundwood books in Canada, they're also in USA, they believe in printing books that matter. So fortunately for me, what I want to see, what my goal and vision is kind of aligns with my publisher. So it's important to get the correct match for printing as well. So then marketing and sales and publicity will then extend the book to what it is to readership. And readership and sales and getting it out there is just as important. We need more. And like we all said, we are in the early stages. It is still primitive. We have to expand our readership. Oh, that being said, I wanted to share something. I feel we have more readers in this part of the world than writers, because our children, they read voraciously. I feel we need more brown stories, definitely brown characters, but also more brown writers, like brown names on the books.
Great.
That's what I feel.
Thank you, Saumiya. Sailaja, I'll ask the same question slightly differently to you, because sort of started this press, right? So as opposed to an author who's writing 1 or 2 books and choosing, like Saumiya said, her choices are sort of anchored in her sort of in her lived experience, in what she's noticing. But as a press, as a publishing house, you're thinking of almost a portfolio of books, right? That hopefully between them cover different parts of the brown experience for children, right? So can you just take us through the way you think about this portfolio approach? How do you decide what constitutes an important subtopic within this, and then what your process has been like?
Yeah, so I think it's a great question, and I think our process has shifted as we continue to grow. While we're almost 6 years old, I started the company with zero experience in publishing, which is probably the only reason I was able to do it, because had I known what I know now, I probably would not have started a publishing house. And so I think I look at a variety of things. First is the type of book, like the physicality of it. Is it a board book? Is it an illustrated book? Is it a middle grade book? Because we now do young adult middle grade works. So what is that? Next, I look at the story. We have some what are called teaching tales. And that is quite frequently where children of color have spent their entire lifeline, especially here in North America, being displayed in books. Like they teach about racism, they teach about Diwali, they teach about, Kwanzaa, and then that's it. You never see them again. And so quite frequently, I look to see what the content of the story is. The teaching tales are really important. They're incredibly valuable. But that's not the only thing my press does, or that I look to do. Like I said, we look for the stories of the magnificent and the mundane, the everyday and the extraordinary. And then I start to look at the story. I'm really lucky that we have a portfolio of really phenomenal authors who they have the page turn. They have a turn of phrase. And there's very frequently people ask me, like, what makes me decide on bringing a book into our family? It's often one line. There's often one line in a story that makes me go, that's it. I'll take this book. And then finally, it is the powerhouse behind the book. It is because we are independent and bootstrapped, which means I actually do not draw a salary from this company. There are no investors in this company. Every single book helps to pay the author illustrator and then produce more books. We reinvest every single time into the company. And so it's very, very important for me to have a author. It's very frequently the author who is committed, who is determined and driven and sees the vision, who is passionate about getting Brownness on the shelf. Those are some of the things we look for. I now, since we've expanded our portfolio, look to have a healthy mix of both illustrated books with my other types of books that we produce, whether it's an anthology or board books or middle grade books. I look to have a strong mix between those, usually 50% illustrated, 50% everything else. Illustrated books are just easy access books here in the United States. Like, children love them, teachers love them, parents love them. They're a really easy price point. And they span a long time too. Like, I think children, the sweet spot is certainly that 4 to 7 age, but I see teachers using them in their classroom beyond for a 7-year-old. I see them being gifted. People gift books illustrated books at people's high school graduations. So I think they're a deep part of the US's culture of giving. And so having a good mix of them helps us succeed.
All right. Let me actually ask a follow-on question, and maybe Sailaja, you can answer, and then Saumiya. So one of the sort of perceptions, or maybe even a criticism of the diaspora, right, and this impulse to tradition, right? So this need to anchor on tradition, which is and sort of have a rooted identity, a cultural identity, often takes two forms, right? One is a rooting to the past, right? So the Ramayana, so the epics become really important, etc. And the second is an impulse to anchor to a certain geography, right? To the home country as opposed to where you are. And that often leads to a situation where the current reality, right, of those children, those young adults, is underrepresented in those books, as opposed to this almost tradition, this nostalgic view on life, right? What's your sort of what's your perspective, Sailaja, on this sort of balance, I suppose?
It's really good, and when we started our press, I unabashedly was like, no, I want it to be my daughter's experience. My daughter is now almost 7. Her parents grew up entirely here in the US. She's essentially two generations removed from India. And I wanted this company to unabashedly put out books that reflected that. So my daughter is still very hybrid. She does Bharatanatyam, she goes to Balavihar, but she plays soccer and speaks English primarily, but uses Telugu and Marathi words mixed in to her language. And that's what we wanted to depict. So when you do see stories that sort of call onto that yesteryears, that folklore, you see it done while still being rooted in today. So I think our stories about Harani are a really good example. We have Hanuman and the Orange Sun, and Hanuman moves a mountain. And in those stories, it starts off with Harani, who is a Telugu American girl, who is kind of doing, like, trying to get her mother's attention, or she needs to clean her room and before she goes outside, and she's annoyed. And so her mom's like, I'll tell you a story while you clean the room. And so in those moments, the daughter is rooted in today and gets taken to a story of not quite the past, but a story retelling through her mother's lens that helps her achieve a goal. And those stories do incredibly well, not just with like a South Asian audience that maybe grew up hearing those stories, but audiences for whom their daughter needs to clean up their room, for like non-South Asian families. And I think Saumiya was talking a little bit earlier that it's the story. These stories are, while they have brownness central to their telling and their ethos, they are meant for all. It's like very, very important for all families to have stories of all children of all colors, because that's the only way we are going to step away from this generation of problematicness, of systemic racism. I really believe. And so we don't really call onto the past. Instead, we sort of try to root it and imagine how it could exist today. And when we do travel to India, we do it we do it in like a purposeful sort of nostalgic way, like our book Bindia in India that comes out later this year.
So thanks for answering that. I think we might have lost Saumiya's video. So, Saumiya, can you still hear us? It's showing that your audio is still on. Can you hear us? Okay. Oh, there she is. Okay. Welcome back.
Was it only me that went away?
Yes, that's fine.
Sorry.
You didn't miss too much. That's fine.
Yeah.
I think you're back now. So, okay. So now moving on to the next question. So what is and also this is a slightly tricky one, and then we'll sort of talk about the process itself. How do you think about tackling intersectionality in brown literature, children's literature right now? So, and I think you had started talking about that, Chilla, but maybe Saumiya, if you want to start up talking about, let's say, gender in brown literature, or let's say questions of race in brown children's literature especially. So there's two questions, right? One, how do we make these themes accessible for children? And then within brown literature specifically, how do you tackle these themes, these intersectional themes of gender and race and so on?
Like I said, for me, it's always the story, and I speak from my personal experience, maybe my personal experience of writing. When you write a story, I'm trying to write YA novel. When you write a story and you sit with a story for me, it's the story. If the story demands, or there comes a point in the story where the character is disabled or there has been an accident, then that's good. For me, the story decides. The story writes the theme. I never set out deliberately introducing a character or trying to bring out a theme. Now that's me. Having said that, I have seen some books. There is an author in the USA. She's beautifully written some very good books. One of them is called A Time to Dance. Her name is Padma Venkatraman. She's written Climbing Downstairs and A Time to Dance. Time to Dance is a story about a teenage girl, a teenage brown Indian dancer fighting off a disability. When you read the book and reread the book, it's the brilliance of the character, it's the strength of the character, it's the power of the language that really resonates. Now, for me, once that comes out, the underlying, like the undercurrents or the underlying themes of messages or brown or disability or gender will sort of like automatically come up, stand along with it. So it is how it's done. If you think about these themes while you're writing, that is great. And if you want that to come in, it will find its way into your story. So for me, I speak purely from my personal thoughts, not a pre-decided agenda. It will come out. It will make its way, and it's a story that will carry. It's the writing. It's the story that will carry these themes out. And that being said, I think I'm just loud thinking now that it's probably a good idea to have these thoughts and themes of intersectionality in mind, and it will find its way, I guess.
Thank you, Saumiya. Sailaja, would you like to sort of come in?
Yeah, I think for us, it's actually a really core part of how we decide scripts and how we create the visuals and the language for the books. So for instance, in Harini and Padmani Say Namaste, which is this illustrated book that sort of takes a child through yoga asanas, the opening page, you see Harini with her two moms walking into yoga class. And that's it. Like, that's all. Let's like, you know, there is no commentary about meet Padmani's moms, or Padmani has a brown mom and a white mom. There's no conversation about it. And that's purposely done because we just wanted to show a lesbian, multiracial family doing what all families here in the US do, going to yoga. Like that's it. Now as we continue to create more and more texts, we think about not just the characters, the language they might use that might help to indicate that maybe they are someone who's on the autism spectrum and sensory seeking, and so they need to repeat language multiple times in order to feel safe. We bring that in. When we do illustrations, we now think really critically about not just the characters, the main characters within the book, but then also what the auxiliary characters are doing. So for instance, in Always Anjali, like in that universe for Anjali, her father's a stay-at-home dad. And if you look at in the opening of Always Anjali, it's her birthday and she's excited in the kitchen. And her father very purposely has a towel over his shoulder and is holding the cake to sort of signify that he is the one who baked it and he's the one who made it. So there are little moments of commentary and intersectionality that we bring in every space and place, purposely so. You know, we have characters that have gender neutral pronouns. And we, again, we don't do them as teaching tales all the time. There are going to be moments when we have those teaching tales and need those teaching tales, and we'll bring it in. But otherwise, I think our world just needs a lovely gender binary child hanging with their friends. Like that's what the world needs. The world needs to see a father who stays at home and is doing all the cooking while the mother is going out. It needs to see the interracial lesbian family going to yoga and doing so in the same normative way that like a heteronormative family gets seen. So we think about the intersectionality a lot and purposely put it in every single time.
Yeah, and that's fantastic, Sailaja. Thank you.
I am not nodding along. I was like nodding along with Sailaja. I was saying it has to be seamless, like subtle and seamless. And part of They think not the focus, not the this is all about this. No, it's all about everyday life, like very much like Sailaja said.
Yeah.
Yeah, and absolutely. So now coming to getting these books to readers, right? So let's say Saumiya, your books, right? How have you found? Clearly, there's a lot of demand. I'm sure a lot of people want to read these books. Given where the publishing industry is given distribution, how do you actually get your books to readers, right? How do you get your books to readers? And Sailaja, also after Saumiya's answer, would love to get your perspectives. You've done some fairly fascinating crowd donation things to get books to different people. So yeah, Saumiya, if you don't mind starting, and then Sailaja.
I have done quite some donations. Like I picked on the word donations. I have done quite some personal donations.
Okay.
So my publishers are good in marketing and sales, and they have found my book has found its way in leading libraries and public schools. But I personally,
Saumiya, sorry to
it's
interrupt. I think
Is it
what's
glitch?
happening is when you keep your hand, it's blocking the mic.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yeah, so like I said, I have done a lot of personal donations. I've gone to immigrant and cultural centers where I've kind of gauged that they want to see this book, they want to read this book, they want to present it, that they take it, but they don't want to spend the money to buy this book and that's not really my intent. Oh, I have come here to sell the book. I want this book to be heard. So I have done quite some voluntary readings at some pockets of the where the books were not really bought, but I read the book to a daycare center, at a library event, and at schools where they didn't show interest in buying the book, but they were very happy that the author will come and sit with the children for 2 hours. I've done a lot in terms of donations, and my daughter goes to Bal Vihar here. That's like Sunday school that she goes. So this is my observation that in certain socioeconomic strata, people of a certain socioeconomic strata would not mind wanting to know and having fun and reading, but they don't want to buy. If you start donating, gifting, on my daughter's birthday, I presented my books to a bunch of children. The goal or the intent of I want to put this book in a brown child's hand is achieved, right? So for me, just the fact that a brown child or two or many or some in a school have read this book and something about what was inside that book has stayed. So that's my small step in a bigger journey.
Thank you, Saumiya. Sailaja?
Yeah, so since we're a publishing house, we're responsible for distribution. We distribute around 50% through third party, which means like on Amazon, using some of the fulfillment centers here in the US that bookstores traditionally order from. We prioritize using indie bookstores, and frankly, for all of you out there, Amazon is actually the devil. They're horrible to publishers, to authors, to illustrators. Anytime you think about buying a book, never go to Amazon.com.
Wow.
That's my PSA for this. Never do it,
Wow.
please. Because it's bad. It's very, very bad. We then also have a couple of different ways in which we raise the funding for our books. Like I said, we're bootstrapped. There is no investor. There's no funding here. So what we do is we do pre-order campaigns. And in our pre-order campaigns, individuals can not only commit to purchase a copy of the book, but they can also sponsor a copy of the book for our 1001 Diverse Books campaign. So once I started this company, I quickly realized that the people who needed these books the most, the people who wanted access to these books the most, were those who didn't have the economic means. They were the individuals for whom having a book was a luxury, and they might go an entire lifetime without having a book. And so for that reason, I just started to give away books. And in case you're wondering, that's not a great business model. It makes it very hard to produce your next series of books if you're just giving them away. And so I started the 1001 Diverse Books campaign. It is my vision and mission as a CEO to commit 1001 copies from each one of our books that we produce. 1001 go to nonprofit and literacy organizations and individuals who just sort of say, like, I would love this book, but I don't have the means to have this book. And the way our community can help us achieve that goal is by sponsoring a copy of a book for $10. And we've had 2 rounds of that, of books being part of our 1001 Diverse Books campaign. And we've seen a lot of success with that. We, in this time, have donated multiple copies, not only to nonprofit organizations like the Children's Book Council, Behind the Books, but also to cities and municipalities. I think in this time of COVID, you're seeing quite quickly that because schools are shut down and government institutions are shut down, access to literature is incredibly difficult for communities of color here in the United States. And so we have started to distribute our books for free alongside meal distribution programs. Quite frequently in meal distribution programs, those are also the individuals who are going to have difficult access to new books or even just literature. And so we've started to pair with cities and governments to get them books so that they can get it to their constituencies. And it's been really incredibly successful. But it means we rely on our community, and that can be a challenge.
No, absolutely. So I do want to probe that a little bit further, right? So even the title of our panel today says greater representation, celebrating Brownness. So obviously one type of reader is a child who sees himself or herself in that book, right? So, but there's also there's a huge amount of value in having other children experience Brownness through this book, right? So let's say white children reading about Brownness, right? So what has your experience been about, let's say, these books being read by different sort of children, not necessarily brown?
Yeah. So here in the US, there's this phenomenal scholar who goes by the name Dr. Rudine Bishop Smith. And she is a psychologist and studied children's literature. And she has this theory of windows, mirrors, and sliding doors. Books can be mirrors where they can reflect your lived reality. And that's what our brown children see in these books. They can also be windows that allow a child who's maybe not of the same background to look in and explore a new community. And then finally, there are these sliding doors that allow a child to enter in an experience. And so I very, very quickly correct people who will come to a festival. Oftentimes we do festivals, and I'll be behind the booth and they'll be like, this is perfect for my neighbor. They just had an Indian baby and this is great. And I'll ask, but why doesn't it work for your family? And it stops them straight, because they're like, you're right. Why doesn't it work for my family? I'm like, there's no reason why it doesn't. You can buy 2. You can go ahead and buy 2, one for you and one for your friend Rema. Like, that's fine. Yeah. And they quickly realize it. So I think the power and the impact is that they are seeing and experiencing more than just the world around them. And they're just starting to quietly, and for lack of better words, normalize brownness. Like, I think there's nothing more beautiful than seeing a young white girl who's with 2 lesbian moms argue with her mother that she's not going to eat dinner because it's not sundown, because she just finished reading because it's Ramadan. They're not practicing Muslims. She's just trying to not eat dinner. But there's something really beautiful about that moment of her, like, recognizing that space, internalizing what Ramadan is, and like, maybe not, like, she's not celebrating it by any means, but she's using it in this way that children start to create imagination. And I think that's great. And that's what we want these books to start to foster and create in families and communities around the world.
Absolutely. Love the metaphor, windows, doors, and slide windows, mirrors, and slide doors. So, Saumiya, your take on this?
For me, it's also the novelty of brownness, the brown culture. So I had gone to Alice Munro festival for kids lit. This was in interior Ontario. It's a very rural community. From the expression on the children's, the teachers, and the principals' faces, I sense that they've not possibly not seen this. Was kindergarten grade 1, so children 5, 6 is possibly not seen a book like this or even an author looking like this. So I usually go with I went last year. I usually go with props. My story has a sari, it has a hat, it has the puja bells. I go with props, and I observed that they like the story, but the novelty of objects and trinkets, it attracts. That could be a means to appeal. Like, don't know, I've seen that just this novelty of being different. Oh, something that attracts children.
Right.
They want to hear more about this fascinating culture. They want to see these brilliant colors. So,
Right. So I have one other question before we move on to the audience questions. So actually two questions, maybe one small, one slightly larger. The first question is, so this, I don't know if you've seen this show that has come out, Never Have I Ever, or at least heard of that. It's a Netflix show based in LA. Have either of you seen that show or heard of that show?
I'll write it down.
I've heard of it. It was written and directed and produced by Mindy Kaling, and I've heard of it. I haven't watched it yet.
So we'll skip that for now. So my last question before we go to the audience questions is, what do you think is next for you personally, and also for brown children's literature in the US or the Americas, in North America?
For me personally, I think, like I said before, it seems to me like we have readers here, but we need more writers. I am writing, and since I'm writing from what I see and what I feel, I'm writing more stories, and hopefully they will find their way into the world. But I'm also thinking of spreading the word about these books, getting more, extending the readership to beyond, like we spoke a few minutes ago, to not just brown children, but to all children. We need more writers, and we have to support each other. We have to draw from our strengths, and we have to possibly collaborate in our visions and in our missions. I've seen sometimes, and I used to be like that some years ago, that sometimes there is a hesitancy, there's a reluctance to, who's going to read this story? This is about me, or this is self-serving. I used to think, sometimes I used to think that this is self-serving, but that has to change, and that has to break. We need more of us. That's what I think.
Thanks, Saumiya. Sailaja?
Yeah, for us, we are branching out, and you'll see this month we're releasing our first young adult anthology called Untold Stories that features the 30 voices of new aspiring writers sharing their experience of brownness, identity, and belonging. It's in collaboration with Brown Girl magazine, and we're incredibly excited to be releasing that. You'll also see future anthology series being released, and our first middle grade fantasy novel coming out. And so there's a lot of that. There's a lot of new literature coming out. I also really strongly believe in helping to support the Black Lives Movement that is happening here in the United States, and helping to give Asian families, South Asian families, the space and the literature that they need to help have really complex conversations with their families. So working towards creating scripts and books that help to foster that specific conversation in households that needs to be happening. And I think we are in an interesting time and space in which we need to do something. There's a community of folks who really strongly believe that literature and books are going to help us move forward through this to create a more equitable society. And so I'm hoping we can help to be a part of that conversation and that movement.
Thanks, Sailaja. With that, let's just come to a couple of really interesting audience questions. So the first question, I suppose the first two questions by Karuna. She asks, what is your opinion on the Bollywoodization of everything Indian, from weddings and ceremonies to outfits? I suppose she's asking about the diaspora. What is the effect of Bollywoodization of everything Indian for, let's say, children in the diaspora, right?
I mean, we don't have it. Like we have it, we have a book coming out called Vindhya in India, where you'll see sort of a big like an Indian wedding, but it's very much rooted in the author's experience of being, you know, an American, like an Indian American, and going to India in the first time, and it sort of is nostalgic and takes place in the late 90s, early 2000s, like sort of a coming of age of India too. And so you have a little bit of that there, but I think it's really problematic because it really, really sort of makes India seem homogenous. It creates this very superficial understanding of what it means to be Indian. I'm unabashedly South Indian. I'm Telugu, that's my mother tongue. And I am completely erased from Indian experiences told here in the media. My existence is completely erased because everyone asks me, like, am I a Patel? Do I own motels? And do I do that Bhangra thing? And the answer is no. And I don't speak Hindi. It's just really problematic because India is this nation that has so many languages, so many cultures, so many religions, and the Bollywoodification of it has been incredibly problematic and disruptive to what could be a unified community here in the United States.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
I agree 100%. I'm so thrown away that exactly like what Sailaja said. Oh, you don't do this. And I said, no, I actually do this. I don't do that. I'm just very thrown off by shallow glam sham for the sake of glam. It doesn't appeal to me, and
no, I think that's exactly
the question. Relate to it.
No, that's exactly the question. I think what the question really is look, the dominant sort of if you were to just look at the volume of culture available, a lot of it is Bollywood, right? And if that becomes a prism through which you try and understand your own brownness or Indianness, in the absence of alternative literature, the kind of which you're trying to produce, then there's a problem. I think that's what the question is asking. Do you think right now there is a very, very almost distorted understanding that sometimes gets created in, let's say, children who may not have access to these books?
So all the more reason the accessibility of the true stories, the accessibility of books, of good books, of quality books that matter should extend. We have to speak about our books. We have to speak about true stories and more events, maybe like this, and extend it to a media. Like I don't know the practicality of how this would be done. I don't know how to achieve this, but speak of our books in bigger media. Bollywood is massive to compete, so we don't compete. It's not pitting one against each other. We move more forward in what we do and how we do what we do. That's important. We are at a, like I said, it's very primitive state, but at least we are on the first step. Once we are on the first step, we will be moving forward. I see us moving forward.
Sure. Great, thanks. Sailaja, any commentary on that? Bollywood is a very simplifying prism and perhaps a very damaging prism.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I haven't watched a Bollywood movie since like maybe Kuch Kuch Hota Hai, so that should give you guys a telling as to where my world of Bollywood. I don't like. I just haven't. And I think again, our books are purposely working to break down that dynamic. Like our characters are purposely. Like Hernie is a Telugu American girl because I'm a Telugu American girl, you know, and characters like Anjali, she's, you know, she lives in this world where she's probably Gujarati, and that's because the author is. And those are authentic, wonderful moments to tell stories. But I think when I see some of the mainstream, when I see some of the big five put out South Asian books, they always fall short to me because they always get a little whitewashed. You can tell. I can tell. I can see it. I can tell that the editor didn't understand something and thought it wouldn't resonate and forced the author to make a change, which has watered down the book. And our press doesn't do that. I might ask an author a tough question. Like I might be like, can you tell me more about that? And then we decide together as a community, like, is this going to help? Is this going to help the reading? Is this going to help the appeal? What are the things we need to keep? What are the things that we are going to let go?
Sure.
I lost an opportunity. I don't know if that was the only reason, but that was a heavy reason because I did not agree to deliberately put what the editor wanted me to, because it's not marketing the country and the culture and the author. I don't know if that was the reason, but I did lose out the chance on publishing a book. But that's okay because the book will find itself in another space. Yeah.
So thanks for answering that. Let me move on to a question that Sairam has asked, and I'll try and layer on a separate question on top of that. Right? So I don't know if you've been following, but Unilever, the company, has been drawing a lot of flack because of what they did with the skin cream that a bleaching cream essentially. It's called Fair and Lovely. They rebranded it to Glow and Lovely. And so Sairam is asking, doesn't the continued huge sales figure of this product point to a section of large number of people who are still confused with the concept of skin color, right? And they're troubled by the color. Now, the question I want to add to that is, when you look at phrases like blackness or brownness, right? Now, obviously, they are very, very good organizing devices because they help people, they hold a mirror and maybe even a window. But are there unintended consequences of using words like brownness, right? And if that becomes the prism through which people start looking, are there any difficulties and problems that also emerge from that use?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I don't look at it. I wouldn't look at it as a problem because for me it's stating what it is. The color of my skin is brown, so it's brown. That's the color of my skin. The color of your skin is white. That's the color of your skin. My skin color is brown, like your skin color is black.
The challenge, Saumiya, is there's nothing like brown, right? And there's nothing like pure white. It's a very, very wide spectrum. So you're collapsing a bunch of different skin colors, calling them brown, right? So there's no, your brown and my brown is very different.
Okay. Can you rephrase the question? Can you restate the question?
So there's no one brown, right? If brown truly is only the skin color, then there are a million browns.
I see. Okay.
Brown is being used as a catch-all to define something. Okay. I'm asking whether there's some unintended consequences of that as well.
I see. Okay.
I think for us, we work really, really hard actually to depict all levels of brownness, from very dark, deep brown to a lighter color brown to help show the spectrum, but to make it very, very apparent that our characters are unabashedly brown and very proud brown. So I think, again, when you look at here in the US, there's sort of a big five is what they're called, publishing houses, who, if you look at their Indian stories, the color of the children's skin is not brown. It's not. It's not. They have been whitened. They look like a brown child who has been asked to use Fair and Lovely. And I'm not here for it. I'm not here for it. I'm here for making unabashedly beautiful brown children in books, and to celebrate that, and for them to be points of conversations, not just for children and caregivers, but for parents and for families, so that the sales of something that's now called Glow and Lovely will continue to decline, so that children can feel celebrated in their skin color and that their parents can celebrate it alongside with them.
Thanks, Shelda. Neeru asked a question again. I'll try and later on question. She's asking about, I think it's a she. She's asking about books in Indian languages, because that would also be equitable representation. So the question really is, so let's say there is brown literature, children's literature that is brown. How do you think about the role of language, right? So is there a decoupling of language and the content, or let's say, would it make more sense just to have a lot of English books around brown children? How do you think about language in these choices?
I think it's important, just as important. I'm sorry if I.
No. I was going to say, Saumiya, you should answer it. So I'm glad you are. And then I can answer.
It's important. I think it's important for other language, Indian language writers to write books in the languages that they write in. I grew up in Bombay. I speak and understand Hindi, Marathi very well. I'm a Tamilian, but I cannot write. I cannot even think in another language other than English. So I wish I could, because the beauty of vocabulary and just the beauty of language in one medium, I don't think can be. It cannot be just as true in a translation. So there should be more writers of languages other than English, and there should be more readers. Now it's a demand and supply question, probably. If there are writers, they're writing, and some publishers are publishing, but there isn't enough readers, then again there is an imbalance. But my personal thought would be, my ideal thought would be to have a stability in that line of demand and supply as well. But that's what I think, because my grandparents are Malayalis. My husband speaks Bhojpuri. The beauty in languages. I'm just stating out Bengali, Malayalam, and Bhojpuri, because the ring and the lull that some words have in these languages is incomparable. It's unbeatable. It should be stated like it is. You cannot translate, replicate that. I'm not saying, Bengali is more beautiful than English. It cannot be replicated or translated, so it will be received, it will be perceived like the way it was intended to. The beauty will come out only if it's in the original language. But that being said, readership is another place to tackle. Do we have as many Bengali readers? Are there as many Hindi medium schools? Do children read other languages? Do children, or the readers read and write and appreciate other languages as much as they do in English. I don't know about that.
I think
But
the
I
question's
think that
pretty.
should not die down. That should never die down. That's what I think.
Yeah. And I think there certainly is, there's an economic cost involved, you know, and that's probably the biggest hurdle. But there's also this other didactic challenge here where I speak Telugu, I like to think fluently, but I can't read the script very well. And my husband is Marathi, and so he could never, here in the US, like he can't pick up a Telugu book and start reading it with my kids. He can't pick up a Marathi book and start reading it with his kids. Yeah. And so we are starting to work on ways to bridge that barrier. So we have a board book called Shubhratridos that is written and illustrated by wonderful illustrator Nidhi Chanani. She is in a multiracial family. Her husband is non-Indian, but is learning Hindi alongside his daughter. And she's a native Hindi speaker. And so the book itself uses Devanagari script, Romanized Hindi, and then English. And so the vision there is that any member of the family could pick up that book, you know, and be able to read it. And so it's a really important question about not only thinking about what is the language that it should be in, but how do I make it accessible to the entire family unit, however they might exist. If I had infinite funds, I would have an on-demand printer and have translated all of the books into the variety of Indian languages that exist. Because I think there's nothing like hearing a story in a mother tongue and giving a grandmother who's visiting the United States for 6 months to take care of her grandchildren an opportunity to read in her native language, a story that the child recognizes because they've read it in the classroom in English. I think that's a beautiful moment. And my answer is, we don't have the economy, like the economic mobility to do it yet, but you know, one day.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think
that concept is actually brilliant. It's a win-win for all. Tulika and Pratham Books, there are some publishers in India. Tulika is one of them. They do books like this. There's script in Hindi and English. It's really win-win.
Yeah.
If you have everything on one page and one text, it works for all.
Yeah. All right. I think we've answered all the questions. We're almost at time. I would now ask both of you, just for your closing sort of comments, any sort of any interesting things that you think we didn't really cover that matter to you as you think about your work in this sort of in this space.
I can take that. I think one thing I wanted to share is, so I'm focusing, or I've written now, picture books. So picture books, I would think, is usually read by a parent or an adult to a child. And somewhere in children's literature, in young children's literature, adults or the primary caregiver to a child plays an important role in starting, in thinking along these lines, in talking about what we spoke in this session. The primary caregiver to a child, a father, a mother, a grandmother, a daycare instructor, a teacher, we have an important and necessary role to play, first in being aware in ourselves, and then to start and engage these conversations first in our homes and then to our street and inside our schools. It's we as adults too, that have a big responsibility and a share in starting this conversation and paving the way for our children and the future generation. That's important.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Sailaja?
Yeah, I would say that the job of a writer is incredibly difficult. it's a really, really hard job. And I think there are probably a lot of aspiring writers out there who are listening into these conversations. And I think the world is going to tell you that it's hard and you can't. And I'm here to tell you that you can. I think these stories deserve to take up space on the bookshelf. I read every single one of the submissions that we get, and so many of them are trash. And I'm so proud to read them. I'm so happy to see people taking a chance and putting it out there. Put it out there, look for feedback, get to writing, because it will happen. I assure you it will happen, and your story deserves to take up space. And I think we have a role and responsibility, especially here in the diaspora, to continue to think critically and to think in an intersectional lens to help ensure that not only the stories that we produce and are writing, but the stories that go on our children's bookshelves are reflective and help for us to create a better tomorrow.
Yeah, that's a great note to end this with. Thank you, Sailaja. Thank you both actually for your time and being on our panel.
Great.
I truly enjoyed this.
Thank you.
Shranya also wants to say hi to you guys. So she's right there.
Hi, I just wanted to say hello because I feel like I've been talking to you guys for so long.
Oh, thank you.
So I thought I'll just drop in and say hi. But thank you guys for coming and for such an engaging session.
Of course.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
Thank you all.
Okay.
Thank you. I will be in touch over email, but thank you for coming today.
Thank you so much, you guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Ciao.